Um, so what I really wanted to do in this group is uh, show you guys again, the Hoosier Resiliency Index and maybe look at a couple different places in the region um, and think about how to incorporate it at the regional level. So I'm going to find the right window. It's this one, right? Where'd it go? Oh, I have two things open. And then I'm going to share my screen. So, um, this is a website that IU has established, um, and it gives you vulnerabilities by jurisdiction. So, like here, I was gonna just start with Valparaiso because that's where I live. That was before I knew a lot of other people lived there. And I pretty much they have every community that's participated in ERI on the drop down. Um, so if you haven't, but because we did the counties, we also have the counties. But so then, and then it says okay, in Valparaiso, if the globe follows the medium emission scenario model, we would go from 23 total days with extreme heat events to 60 total days. So that's almost 3 times as much. And if the globe follows the high emission scenario, we'd have 73, which is 4 times as much as we have now. Um, so that's the risk, right? So that many more days. And then it also does for extreme precipitation, this tool will give you how many more events. We're going to get 2 more, regardless of the scenario, we'll probably get 2 more extreme precipitation events than we have now in Valparaiso. Um, then they give you some different things you can look at. You can look at land use groups and subgroups. And ultimately, it does a bunch of stuff and will tell you. So in land use in Valparaiso, we have 109 acres in the floodplain. In agriculture, 202 acres that are developed, 8 acres of forest or vegetation, or at 48 acres of wetland in a floodplain in the Valparaiso city limits. Also, it can give you, so I didn't click that. If I click, let's do socio. Okay, I can't do both. Do I have to cancel that? What? Oh, I can also do people and do socioeconomic vulnerability. And then this part didn't change, but well, apparently we didn't get a percentile for that. So that's the information you get, and then there's a lot of discussion questions. So one of my concerns with this is this the best tool to use? What other tools are out there? I think talking about floodplain is not personally, my personal opinion is that floodplain misses a lot of flooding. It misses that kind of urbanized flooding that happens. Like I've had before, my house, my basement is flooded, or we have to close roads because there's street flooding just because the infrastructure can't handle it rapidly enough. So there's some risk in those and cost in those, and like people that drive through flooded streets and cause problems. And so, but I also don't know how many communities. Valparaiso did a big like survey and study of that, and I don't know how many communities would have done that. We
I put the question in chat, Kathy,
okay,
asking people where they're from, just in case if there is data
yeah,
available for another community, maybe somebody would like to see if that's modeled. Am I correct in understanding that all the communities that participated in the greenhouse gas inventory have data that can be pulled up here? Is that right?
yes. So we can pull up Gary, because David Wright is here. And I mean, the heat days aren't very much different. The precipitation days, you get one more or two more than Valparaiso. I'm not sure why, but
Yeah, I don't either. I thought that was interesting.
the Lake County and Porter County and LaPorte County all were slightly different. So when I was put it in the presentation before, I just put a range, but
It's lake effect.
yeah, maybe, or maybe you're closer to Chicago, or maybe I'm sure you have more heat island with all the industry and pavement, but so, and it doesn't talk about how hot either. So I'm guessing if we do the people section here, yeah, we get some different information. So in this category, blue, oh, there's overall vulnerability. So in the top percent, a lot of your area, but they always, U.S. Steel is its own census block, so that always throws me off. But I think a lot of your population is in the top percentile of vulnerability.
Kathy,
Yes.
one of the issues with rain and flooding
Mm-hmm.
isn't so much the damage caused by the floods as much as the disease that's spread by mosquitoes and other insects, possibly ticks.
Right.
And then we have to also be aware that a lot of the lower income people don't have air conditioning, so their doors or windows are open. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what direction this goes in, but we need to figure out something to have a better idea or inventory of what pathogens
Mm-hmm.
our populace are being subjected to. I think
Um,
floodplains are interesting. I'm an engineer,
yeah.
drainage
You know,
issues we have are one thing, but all those
Mm-hmm.
little ponding issues, the collection of tires, the
Mm-hmm.
other things that we can do to improve
you know,
that.
So
Kevin,
you'd
it's
like
kind
us,
of funny. I was
you'd
just
like
gonna
to, I'm sorry, David.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Kevin, you would like if we would mine these two topics in more detail, and I think we can do that with the Purdue
Mhm.
climate assessment. There's a section on health, and I think that was one of the examples I had too of like how many schools have air conditioning and how many don't. And if your school doesn't have air conditioning, then you're going to have more days out of school
Mhm.
or less ability to have summer school. And who does that hurt the most? So,
Right.
um,
They're going to have heat stroke and other.
right. So we should look at health. Okay, both flooding and heat from health impacts. And then David, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just gonna share an observation that when Gary did its mosquito
Mm-hmm.
um, spraying, some parts of town were really appreciative of it, but Millerites weren't. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of just simple,
Right.
municipal functions um, are responded to differently based on a lot of hierarchies of need.
Right.
I think there might be a lot of unfounded fears too. As a kid,
Mhm.
I was running in back of a fog of a mosquito truck every summer. So
Gee, Kevin. No, I'm sorry. I was like,
but
um,
but really
uh,
the positive impacts, the control over the,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to some of the other fears we have.
Mhm.
Um, I also don't know like this. Well, it does tell us, oh, Gary, you have 545 acres of agricultural land in the floodplain. Um, that's interesting. And 135 acres of wetland. Wetland wants to be in the floodplain, so that's good, but um I don't understand. I need to delve into this too because forest and vegetation doesn't make sense to me why there's none of that because um so this is not even doing that. anyway, so I think health is a good one. We could do more about, because that is something people can understand, and that includes both disease vectors and heat, I think, are clearly health related. So, and I don't know, there's what other, it seems like everything's coming down to those two, the flooding, well, they don't really say flooding, the high precipitation events, um, and extreme heat events. So, um, are there other like vulnerability risks that we should think of devolving from those two? Um, um,
Do you mean from the health aspect or?
well, I know, so there's a different tool I found on NOAA's page, and I'm not going to navigate, but it talks a lot about jobs in the floodplain. You know, so if you're flooded, how many people are going to be out of work? Um, and there's more detail in that. Is that some? So part of my question is, well, how much detail ought we to go as the regional framework? Um, do we hand off all the risks to the local governments and then they can decide which ones they are the most concerned about? Um, should we identify the most concerning ones?
I'm not quite understanding the job aspect, but I do understand it from production standpoint of agriculture and the related businesses where
I,
we see losses.
mhm. I think because NOAA is in commerce, it is. It's like this many businesses are in the floodplain, and this many jobs may be interrupted if there's a severe flood.
Well, and even if you're
Mhm.
not in the floodplain in
Right.
agriculture,
Yeah.
you get the violent storm between wind, hail,
Hmm.
and
That's true.
rain. You can pretty much decimate your earnings for the year, or a farmer's earnings.
Um, there is also uh, in the Hoosier Climate Impact Assessment, there is a report about natural ecosystems and another separate report about green infrastructure, the impacts. Um, one of my concerns about relying really heavily on that is they pretty much gave and this is a good one for feedback from you guys. They divided the state into three sections: north, middle, and south. So they basically, all their north third predictions are for South Bend. If we use those predictions, um, impact predictions in Northwest Indiana, will people reject those out of hand because they're not local? Um, and alternatively, Chicago has done a lot of work in this area, but I don't necessarily want to use Chicago predictions in our area either. Um,
Kathy,
so, because we do
have
know
you,
we're a little different because of lake effect. That's one difference. Um, what do you guys
and
think?
that's,
Is using out of town impact assessment more important to do it anyway, even though it's out of town, or um, decide that we need to put some focus on raising resources to get some localized impacts? I know Chicago Wilderness included Northwest Indiana in their planning, so I feel like on the natural area end, we have better local predictions than on some of these other.
I just wanted to bring up another vulnerability.
Okay.
You spoke to the lakes. Lake Michigan coastal areas are particularly subject to these changes.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're experiencing higher lake levels for the last couple years anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's cyclical, but the decrease in the time between cycles is very noticeable. It's huge impact on all of our communities. And that's a major economic impact on our towns and cities.
And we're doing some work with the DNR on that right now. I don't know that we have good. I know the Purdue study didn't include it. I still don't think we have good data on the coastal storm impacts, or good. There is not good models for the climate impacts on coastal storm frequency and um, ferocity. That's not a.
And I don't know if there's any
Mhm.
information as far as the shipping industry relating to the economics of how it impacts it. But National Park Service might be able to offer information related to our tourism.
Mhm.
Can I pipe in? I've been
Mhm.
taking notes, but I do want to share a story. A friend of mine, her dad was actually a doctor. You know, that's not usually the person you think of when you think of vulnerable populations. They lived in a very upscale home, but he was on, medical devices that required, electric.
Power
So
outage.
they actually lost power during, brownout or whatever. And, there had been flooding, so they couldn't get him from his hospital bed, they just physically couldn't, get the emergency folks in
Mhm.
there. They didn't have power, so it's just like a lot of these things can compound that aren't always like the communities you think about, although obviously the concentration hits
Mhm.
harder in a lot of communities that don't have that access. But
I think as elderly, no, with the age is not one of the. Um, well, I think
and
age is
mobile,
included in household composition,
yeah, and so like mobility was kind of another,
mobility.
thing. If you're tied to your,
Yeah.
your oxygen machine or whatever. And I
Mhm.
just want to remind people, I am taking notes on Jamboard, and I'm trying to get what you
Oh,
say
yeah.
correctly, and we'll have the recording. But if you want
Right.
to add anything yourself, please, click on that first
Okay.
link shared in chat, and you can type in your own stuff. And if you don't want to do that, you can just type it in chat and I'll copy and paste too.
Right. Well, like when it's time almost, oh, it's 4 minutes before wrap up. Do you want me to pop over to the Jamboard? Why don't I share the Jamboard instead, and then,
Sure. Yeah.
or if you want to share it, I can stop sharing.
It doesn't matter. If you've got it up, you can do it.
Okay,
That's
I
fine.
do. I do. I thought I
So
did.
can I
Um,
piggyback a little bit off of what Kathy was just saying? Because I was thinking similar things, right? And we're talking about vulnerability and what kind of policies and things like that can help them. So I think we don't want to like mix
that's
up
not
like
it.
vulnerabilities and like the risks that we're going to face
Yeah,
with climate change or the
it's
impacts
true.
that are coming to us. So I think of vulnerabilities as like, do we have the infrastructure to withstand this, right? So a lot of stormwater treatment plants and combined sewer overflows, are they able to
Mhm.
handle that more water? And those are things like we know, right? If there's failing infrastructure, if people don't have access to like medical
Mhm.
care, if people can't
Mhm.
leave because of income levels or they're stuck in those places, right? So it's one thing to
Mhm.
live in a floodplain, it's another to not be able to leave there or have that ability.
Mhm.
Um, access to public services or emergency services or
Mhm.
those kinds of things are going to make places more vulnerable. And
Mhm.
you kind of touched on like the natural area stuff, right? Like more pavement, less area for infiltration is going to be a huge impact on flooding, right? Impermeable
Mhm.
surfaces are things we probably already know or have that data,
Mhm.
right? Deferred maintenance on infrastructure things and stuff like that,
Mhm.
that we could be improving to improve resiliency and lower vulnerabilities, maybe.
Um, that is, I think, really important distinction to make, right? That you're right, the vulnerability versus the resiliency. Um, and I'm not sure like where at this point do we focus on places with with those vulnerabilities, and then I feel like that's a whole nother thing. Like actually I've been wanting for several years for us at NERPC to do a vulnerability assessment of transportation infrastructure, like culverts and bridges, to this increased flooding, and haven't gotten it together to do it. Because then that goes back to the vulnerability of people. If they can't get out because even if David can't run a bus because the culverts are collapsing, um, Thank you, Kathy.
Well,
Simple,
yeah, I
since
guess
I
I was
could not find
thinking
that.
like, if
Hmm.
we have a stormwater infrastructure that can't handle now,
Yeah.
how's it gonna handle it, 20 years from now?
Hmm. And I think for a lot of that, though, that really is going to be local. The local government's going to know that for their own climate action plan. So that's the example. Maybe we give them a couple things that they need to consider into their system, or we could. I don't want to create something new. Figure out a index. Is your stormwater infrastructure? Kevin Brightsky, is there besides the like A B C D E F standard that the engineers um use, is that pretty well accepted? Is there a good um I'm looking for existing evaluation methods to determine the vulnerability of your stormwater infrastructure.
I think our best resource may be LTAP
Yeah.
at Purdue, and there's several other references, but
Mhm.
I think the best probably would be what Purdue can offer, generally speaking. And most of our municipalities are already engaged. They're
Mhm.
engineers, they're superintendents of highway.
They were not, LTAP was not interested at all in working with the climate impact assessment team. But that was a few years ago. That could have changed.
It will, but right now their hands are full with what they do. So
Hmm.
So I know we're at time. I
Hmm.
think we gave ourselves a little wiggle room just to
Hmm.
have, some movement between this room and that room. But I'm putting the original meeting link in chat just in case you don't have that handy.
Okay.
But I mean, I think we did give ourselves 5 minutes or 4 minutes from now
Yeah.
back in the other. So if there's things that you all want to keep continuing, we do have a little wiggle room.
Okay. I think is the thing about infrastructure. Yeah, there it is. And do you guys feel like everything we talked about is captured?
Please feel free to make your own edits, or you can type in chat if I've misconstrued something you said. I'll listen to the replay too and try to make edits.
Hmm. Eric, did Eric already leave? David, do you want to report out on this for our group?
David, would you be willing to do that?
Which David? Me?
David Wright.
Sure.
Just what we talked about. I don't think it's a big
Yeah.
deal. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, because you stayed. Okay, so we should hang up and go back to the other Zoom link.
Yeah, I'll leave it. Renee had a question though. What did you
Oh,
say? Renee, what is LTAP?
Oh, technical assistance program. It's at Purdue. So federal highway gives money to the state, and the state gives that money to Purdue to provide local technical
Local
assistance
technical
program.
assistance program. Yeah.
And they do a lot of training for local public works departments, local highway departments on road things, and it includes stormwater management. I don't know what all they do, but those are the ones I know because I work here. They probably do other stuff too.
mostly connected with the School of Civil Engineering, but all
Yeah. I don't know if they do wastewater and drinking water and all that stuff too.
Occasionally, but there's a university in each state that has a similar program.
Yeah.
And but while we're talking about vulnerability, it occurred to me we didn't mention anything about loss of habitat.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Right.
how that impacts all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of work on that. We could just steal from Chicago Wilderness.
Right.
The other ones, I don't know that there's a lot of work on, so we might have to do more digging.
I'll add loss of habitat though.
Yeah.
Kind of rethinking wildlife. Is that what you
Yeah.
were? Okay. And now I think we probably should.
We do have to
come
go.
close. Well, probably.
Okay. So I'll see you all.
We'll see you back in the main room.
Okay.
Okay.
thank you for being a part of this, everyone.